The Texas air was thick with heat that spring morning in 2023 when a group of workers stumbled upon something strange on the edge of the Big Thicket National Forest. They had been clearing out what was left of an old apiary, rusted barrels, splintered boards, and the ghosts of long-forgotten hives. Among the debris stood a single beehive box, sealed tight, heavier than it should have been. At first they thought it might be full of honeycomb, turned solid over the years. But when the lid was pried open, the smell of damp concrete and decay escaped into the air. Inside was not wax, nor bees. It was a block of gray cement, smooth and deliberate. And there, jutting from its surface, was a fragment of human bone. Within hours, police arrived, the quiet woods transforming into a crime scene. As the concrete was broken apart under the Texas sun, a skeleton emerged, wrists bound, bones charred. Matt Gibson had always been drawn to the quiet parts of the world, the places where human noise faded and nature reclaimed the soundscape. At 38, he worked as a system administrator for a small tech firm, a job that paid the bills but rarely stirred the soul. His real passion, the one that made sense of everything else, was photography. Not portraits, not glossy urban skylines, but the raw, unfiltered stillness of the natural world. His friends used to joke that he preferred birds to people, and in many ways, they were right. Matt had the patience of a heron. He could sit for hours in a patch of marshland, waiting for the faint flicker of movement that would turn into the perfect shot. The Big Thicket National Forest in Texas had always been his sanctuary. Sprawling across nearly 1 million acres of tangled swamps, dense forests, and quicksand bogs, it was one of the few places left that still felt untouched. The air there was thick with the smell of pine and rot, of something ancient and unchanging. To outsiders, it was inhospitable, a maze of mosquitoes, snakes, and oppressive heat. But to Matt, it was alive. It was where he felt most human, ironically, in a place where civilization couldn't quite reach. He'd first come to Big Thicket years before, chasing rumors of a rare species of heron said to nest deep within the swamps. The stories were mostly local myth, but Matt thrived on that kind of challenge. He'd built a modest online following, posting his photographs. Quiet moments of mist hovering above still water, the sun breaking through thick branches, the delicate flash of wings against dawn light. His work was meditative, almost reverent, a man trying to understand the rhythm of a place that refused to be tamed. That spring of 2017, when the air grew heavy and the first insects of the season began to buzz in earnest, Matt decided to return once more. He'd been talking about it for weeks, telling colleagues that he needed a break from office walls and glowing screens. The trip was meant to be short, 2 nights alone, by the edge of the marshes, camera in hand, no agenda, but to capture the beauty of the changing light. He packed methodically, his tent, sleeping bag, a small gas stove, tinned food, and his prized camera with its weather-worn lenses. On Friday morning, he loaded everything into his old pickup truck and set off before sunrise. The drive from his home took several hours, but he didn't mind. The road unwound like a ribbon through the Texas wilderness, fields giving way to pine forests and the occasional glimpse of shimmering water. For most of the journey, he had the radio on low, static-laced country songs and news about the heat wave rolling across the state. Somewhere near Counsa, he stopped for fuel and bought a bottle of water and a packet of sandwiches from a roadside store. The clerk remembered him later, polite, soft-spoken, wearing a faded baseball cap and looking like someone content with his own company. That evening, as the sun sank low, Matt pulled over near the entrance to one of the old trails. The sign read, Snake Island Trailhead, an ominous name for a place so quiet, but locals swore it was beautiful at dawn. He texted his sister, Karen, to let her know he'd arrived safely. The message was brief but typical of him. Camping by the marsh tonight. Back Sunday evening. Don't worry if signal's bad, Karen replied with a thumbs up and a heart emoji. It was the last time anyone ever heard from him. Karen later told police that Matt always kept his word. He wasn't reckless or the kind of man to disappear for dramatic effect. He'd been the one steady person in the family, the sort who double-checked the locks and carried a first aid kit even for short walks. She had no reason to think this trip would be any different. But as she hung up the phone that Friday evening, she couldn't shake a faint unease, the kind that comes for no reason, the whisper that something feels slightly off. For Matt, the world that weekend must have felt beautifully simple. Just the whisper of wind through trees, the hum of insects, the sound of water moving through reeds. He'd planned to spend the first night near the marsh edge, close to where he'd once photographed a great blue heron lifting out of the mist. His camera battery was charged, his boots dry, his mind calm. But in the big thicket, silence has a way of turning into something else, something heavier. The deeper one goes, the more the forest seems to listen back. Locals often said that people who ventured too far alone sometimes didn't return, swallowed by mud or lost to the labyrinth of trails. Matt, practical and experienced, likely dismissed such stories as superstition. Yet, as darkness fell and the forest settled into its nocturnal rhythm, he was stepping into a place that did not forgive mistakes. By Sunday, when he was supposed to return home, his phone had gone silent. No texts, no calls. At first, no one worried. Big Thicket's mobile reception was famously unreliable. But by Monday afternoon, when his office called asking why he hadn't shown up for work, concern began to take root. By Tuesday, it turned into fear. Matt Gibson, the quiet man who loved the sound of wings and the solitude of swamps, had vanished without a trace. And no one yet knew that the place he'd chosen for peace would become his tomb, a secret waiting beneath layers of water, wood, and concrete, biding its time to be found. By Tuesday morning, concern had hardened into dread. When Matt failed to return home or answer his phone, his sister reported him missing. The local sheriff's department acted quickly, tracing his route through the forest until they found his old pickup truck parked neatly beside a dirt track at the edge of the Big Thicket Reserve. The doors were locked. Inside, everything was strangely ordinary. A half-empty bottle of water, a pack of cigarettes, and his camera equipment laid out in its case on the back seat. The bag containing his tent and sleeping gear was untouched. It didn't look like a robbery. It looked like someone had stepped out for a moment and never come back. The only things missing were his wallet and mobile phone. For investigators, it made little sense. If this had been a mugging, the camera would have been the first thing stolen. It was worth several $1,000s. But no thief leaves behind something that valuable. It suggested something else, something less random. Perhaps he'd wandered off and fallen, or perhaps someone had met him out there. Over the next few days, the area transformed into a hive of activity. Police officers, volunteer rescuers, and park rangers combed through the tangled terrain, shouting Matt's name into the thick air. Helicopters circled above, their searchlights cutting across the green darkness of the canopy. Dog teams followed his scent from the car, but the trail faded less than a mile in, at a point where the path forked one trail leading deeper into the swamp, the other towards a cluster of abandoned farmsteads swallowed by weeds. The uncertainty split the search party in two. Each group moved forward cautiously, boots sinking into mud, machetes slicing through vines, hearts pounding at every rustle in the brush. The Big Thicket was no place for the faint-hearted. Beneath its beauty lay danger pockets of quicksand, water moccasins coiled beneath roots, and alligators gliding silently through black water. Even the most seasoned hikers spoke of the forest with a kind of wary respect. If someone went missing there, they said, it was rarely by accident, and rarely were they found whole. As hours turned into days, the search yielded nothing. No footprints, no scraps of clothing, no camera tripod glinting in the sunday. It was as though the forest had swallowed him whole. Then came the first flicker of testimony. An elderly couple camping a few miles away reported hearing a single sharp scream on Saturday evening. It was brief, human, and unmistakably male. They had dismissed it at the time, thinking it a drunken outburst or a startled hiker, but when the police questioned them days later, The sound returned vividly to their minds. The direction, they said, was towards the marshlands. Another witness came forward, a truck driver who had passed through the area around the same time. He remembered seeing Matt's vehicle parked by the roadside, and beside it, 2 men. One was Matt, whom he recognized from the missing posters later. The other, he said, was tall, gaunt, with long gray hair, dressed in work clothes. The two appeared to be arguing. The driver didn't stop, but the image stayed with him, the stranger's finger jabbing towards Matt, the tension between them hanging in the air. Investigators followed the lead, combing through records of locals living near the swamp, hermits, ex-convicts, anyone known for hostility towards outsiders. But nothing concrete emerged. Several matched the description. None could be tied to the encounter. The days grew hotter, the volunteers fewer, and the hope thinner. By the end of the second week, the search scaled back. The forest went quiet again, reclaiming its silence. At the sheriff's office, Matt's photograph was pinned to a corkboard under the word "missing." His eyes, calm and kind, stared out from beneath the brim of his hat. A man who went into the wild to capture its beauty and became one of its secrets. For months, then years, his file gathered dust. There were no new leads, no trace of his phone or wallet. Matt Gibson had simply vanished, and the big thicket kept its secret buried in the mud. 6 years passed before the forest gave up its secret. It was the spring of 2023 when a team of laborers clearing out a derelict apiary on the edge of the big thicket came across the old Beehive box. At first glance, it was nothing remarkable. One of many relics from a time when the place still buzzed with life. But when they tried to lift it, the weight was all wrong. It was far too heavy for wood and wax. The box was sealed shut, its hinges rusted, its sides mottled with age and mold. Out of curiosity more than alarm, one of the workers prized the lid open with a crowbar. What met their eyes was not honeycomb but a slab of hardened concrete, smooth and gray, as though someone had poured it deliberately. The realization came slowly. There was something embedded within the cement. A pale curve broke the surface like driftwood rising from water. It wasn't driftwood, it was bone. The police cordoned off the area within the hour. What had been a forgotten ruin became an active crime scene, the quiet hum of insects replaced by the low murmur of detectives and the click of cameras. Under the sweltering Texas sun, forensic teams worked methodically, breaking apart the cement in fragments, careful not to damage what lay within. When the last pieces were removed, the outline of a skeleton emerged: bound wrists, partial charring on several bones, and the unmistakable signs of a deliberate concealment. Whoever had done this hadn't acted in haste. It was the work of someone who wanted the body never to be found. The remains were taken to the county forensics lab for examination. Weeks of careful study followed. Specialists cataloged every detail: the position of the limbs, the residue of melted plastic from what had once been cable ties, the traces of ash embedded in the concrete. The charring suggested the killer had first tried to burn the body, perhaps to destroy evidence, but failed to finish the job before encasing it in cement. The concrete had preserved what fire could not. With little left of clothing or personal items, identification depended on the teeth. Forensic odontologists compared the dental structure with national databases of missing persons. When the report came back, it was almost anticlimactic in its simplicity. The teeth matched those of Matt Gibson, reported missing in 2017. The cold case file, long buried under 6 years of dust, was pulled from storage and laid open on the detectives' desks once more. The yellowed pages told the story of a man who vanished into the swamp without a trace. Now, at last, they had proof that he hadn't wandered off or drowned. He'd been murdered, bound, burned, and hidden in concrete less than 20 miles from where his car was found. For the detective who had led the original search, the discovery felt like both vindication and horror. He had always believed something darker lay behind Matt's disappearance, but the brutality of the truth shook him. The forest had kept its secret for years, but secrets, like the dead, have a way of surfacing. The big thicket, once again, was in the news not for its beauty or its wildlife, but for what it had concealed. And with the identification confirmed, the missing person case officially became a murder investigation. The story that had once ended in silence was beginning again, this time with the promise or the illusion of justice. The name came up quickly once detectives began digging through property records. The land where the Beehive box had been found belonged to a man called Caleb Downey, a reclusive figure known to locals but spoken of in tones of quiet unease. He had lived alone on the edge of the swamp for decades, in a weather-beaten cabin surrounded by rusted tools, half-collapsed sheds, and a perimeter marked with hand-painted signs that read, "Keep Out." People in the nearest town described him as tall, wiry, with long gray hair and eyes that never quite looked at you directly. He was the kind of man who muttered to himself in shops, who always paid in cash, and who made you lower your voice when his name was mentioned. When officers checked his background, they found a history that made their skin crawl. In 2018, just a year after Matt Gibson vanished, Downey had been arrested for attacking two young tourists with a machete. The couple had unknowingly wandered onto his property while hiking, and Downey, emerging from the trees like something feral, had lunged at them, shouting that they were spies, intruders sent to steal from him. They escaped with minor injuries, but the incident was disturbing enough to warrant a psychiatric evaluation. Doctors diagnosed him with paranoid personality disorder, a condition made worse by years of isolation and untreated anger issues. He believed the world was out to harm him, the government, his neighbors, strangers with cameras. After several months of compulsory treatment, he was released and allowed to return home. Officially, he was no longer considered a danger. To the detectives, it suddenly made sense. Matt, with his expensive camera and quiet curiosity, must have wandered too close to Downey's territory. In the distorted logic of a paranoid mind, a photographer could easily be mistaken for a spy or a trespasser. They reconstructed the likely sequence of events: an encounter on the roadside, an argument witnessed by the passing truck driver, a flash of rage followed by violence. Downey, realizing what he had done, panicked. He tried to burn the body, hence the charred bones, but when that failed, he hid the remains in concrete, using an old Beehive box as a makeshift coffin. It was the kind of desperate, clumsy concealment born of madness rather than calculation. Armed with a search warrant, police combed through the remains of Downey's cabin. Inside, time seemed to have stopped. Newspapers were stacked in yellowing towers, food tins rusted on shelves, and the air reeked of damp wood and decay. In the shed behind the cabin, they found bags of cement matching the exact brand and composition of the material used to encase Matt's body. Nearby, a roll of heavy-duty plastic ties lay half-used on a workbench. In the corner stood a fire pit filled with ash and blackened debris. Forensic testing revealed traces of human fat and burnt fabric. The pieces were aligning. Downey had murdered Matt Gibson and tried to erase the evidence in his own backyard. But there was a problem. Caleb Downey was already dead. He had died of a heart attack in 2021, 2 years before the discovery, his body found in the same cabin that now served as a crime scene. The killer had taken his secrets to the grave. For investigators, it was a bitter revelation. They had proof, motive, and means, yet no living suspect to stand trial. Still, one final clue remained: a small, dust-covered box buried under a pile of rags in the far corner of the shed. Inside was a camera. Its body was scratched, but intact. When technicians extracted the memory card, the images told the story no witness could. The last sequence of photographs showed the forest at dusk, then a blurred shot of Downey's cabin, and finally a face twisted in fury, eyes wild, mouth open mid-shout. The next frame was of the sky, taken as the camera fell. Matt Gibson's lens had captured the last seconds of his life and the face of his killer. It was, in the end, undeniable. Caleb Downey had murdered the man who came seeking beauty and buried him in concrete to hide the shame of his madness. The forest had waited 6 long years to speak, and when it did, it told the truth in pictures. In the end, justice arrived too late. Caleb Downey died alone in his cabin, never facing a courtroom or hearing a verdict read in his name. His heart had failed him long before the law could. For Matt Gibson's family, the truth came as both a balm and a wound. After 6 years of sleepless nights and unanswered questions, they finally knew what had happened, but knowing offered no peace. The man who had taken Matt's life would never stand trial, never explain his madness, never apologize. The silence of the forest had been replaced by another kind of silence, the absence of justice. When Matt's camera was returned to his sister, she held it like a relic. Inside were not only the last photographs he ever took, but the truth itself, frozen in one blurred frame that caught the face of his killer. It was proof of what human eyes see in their final moments, and how, even in death, truth finds a way to be remembered. Today, the big thicket looks no different, still vast, still green, still humming with the same uneasy quiet. But somewhere among the reeds and shadows, there lingers the memory of a man who sought beauty and found horror instead. If stories like this make you pause, if you're drawn to the strange, the tragic, and the untold, subscribe to our channel. Each week, we uncover real mysteries that remind us how fragile truth can be and how easily it can be buried until the earth decides to give it back.